Mr. President, last week the American people were stunned by what we learned happened in the White House. We saw an alarming set of developments about how this president is handling the investigation into Russia's interference with our democracy. Last Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee heard testimony from Sally Yates, who President Trump had asked to serve as acting Attorney General when he was first sworn into office. Ms. Yates testified that soon after the inauguration, she twice visited White House counsel Don McGahn to warn him about National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. She warned that General Flynn had been compromised by his secret communications with Russian Ambassador Kislyak and that General Flynn could be blackmailed. Ms. Yates first visited the White House counsel McGahn on January 26. McGahn invited her back to ask follow-up questions the following day on January 27. Those follow-ups included questions about General Flynn's potential criminal exposure. What else happened on January 27th? The President of the United States brought in FBI Director James Comey for a one-on-one dinner where he reportedly asked Director Comey for a pledge of loyalty. Is the timing of this Comey dinner curious? You bet it is. According to Press Secretary Sean Spicer, President Trump was briefed immediately by White House counsel McGahn after Ms. Yates' warning. That means the president knew about the Justice Department's concerns with Flynn when he met Director Comey for dinner. Was the president's request for loyalty from Director Comey an attempt to impede the Justice Department's investigation into General Flynn? Was it an effort by the president to inoculating himself from Russian-related investigations? These are unanswered questions. But when Director Comey reportedly refused to swear his loyalty to President Trump, he apparently sealed his fate as director of the FBI. Last Tuesday evening, President Trump fired Director Comey while Comey was giving a speech to FBI agents in Los Angeles. The reason? Well, on Thursday, the president made clear that the Russian investigation was on his mind when he fired Director Comey. He said to Lester Holt of NBC, and I quote, "When I decided to do it, I said to myself, you know, this Russian thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story," end of quote. President Trump later said that the Russia investigation was, quote, "should be over with, in my opinion. Should have been over a long time ago," end of quote. Then on Friday, the president found time to threaten Mr. Comey on Twitter, implying that he had taped their conversations and that he would release the tapes if Comey disclosed what he knew. Let's be clear, the president is in dangerous territory here. What the president is doing when it comes to potential obstruction of justice is similar to a chapter in history many of us remember. President Nixon, on October 20th, 1973, fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox when his Watergate investigation got too close to the White House. That sparked a constitutional crisis in America. And now we've learned that President Trump has disclosed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister and that same Ambassador Kislyak. The Washington Post reported that the president specifically revealed extremely sensitive intelligence, considered so sensitive that details were being withheld from America's allies and tightly restricted even within our own government. Last night, the White House denied this happened. This morning, however, President Trump confirmed in two separate tweets that the story was true. This kind of disclosure is what former Director Comey and just about every other congressional Republican described last year as, quote, extremely reckless, close quote, in the handling of classified information. It jeopardizes critical intelligence sources in the fight against ISIL and the broader fight by America against terrorism. This morning, European officials reacted, told the Associated Press that at least one European country might stop sharing intelligence with the United States if this is how it's going to be treated. That is not, as Majority Leader described it this morning, quote, drama, close quote. This is a real consequence of a dangerous president putting American lives at risk. This is truly incredible and historic. It is a national security breach by the president of incredible proportions. How in the world can we trust the president to put the national security needs of the American people ahead of his own? There are a lot of parallels between the Watergate era and what we see today. But one major difference from the Nixon era to the Trump era is the willingness of Republicans in Congress to speak out against the abuse of power and to actually serve as a check on the presidency. Back in Nixon's day, there were Republicans in Congress who were willing to speak truth to power, to say enough of the lies and damage to our democratic institutions and to put the country ahead of party. Listen, in November of 1973, just a few weeks after the Saturday Night Massacre, Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts was one of the first Republicans to stand up saying he did not feel the country could, quote, stand the trauma that it's been through for the past few months, close quote. In July of 1974, Republican Congressman Lawrence Hogan of Maryland said, and I quote, excuse me, "The evidence convinced me that my president has lied repeatedly, deceiving public officials and the American people. Do we want to be the party loyalists who, in ringing rhetoric, condemn the wrongdoings and scandals of the Democratic Party and excuse them when they're done by Republicans?" On the same day, Republican Congressman William Cohen of Maine said, quote, "I've been faced with the terrible responsibility of assessing the conduct of a president that I voted for, believed to be the best man to lead this country, who has made significant and lasting contributions towards securing peace in this country and throughout the world. But a president who in the process, by act or acquiescence, allowed the rule of law and the Constitution to slip under the boots of indifference and arrogance and abuse," end of quote. Republican Congressman from Virginia, M. Caldwell Butler said, quote, "For years, we Republicans have campaigned against corruption and misconduct, but Watergate is our shame," end of quote. And Republican Congressman Paul Findley of Illinois, whom I ran against when I first had the privilege to serve in the House and who today I call a friend, said a month later, and I quote, "Hearings of the Judiciary Committee and developments in the courts have, I believe, clearly established gross negligence, maladministration, and moral insensitivity on the part of the president," end of quote. That same month, Republican Senator Barry Goldwater from Arizona said, and I quote, "There are only so many lies you can take, and now there's been one too many," end of quote. In fact, at the same time, Senate Republicans nominated Goldwater to deliver a direct message to President Nixon. Goldwater, along with House Republican leader John Jacob Rhodes and Senate Republican leader Hugh Scott, went to the White House, sat directly in front of President Nixon's desk, and explained that enough was enough. Mr. President, these courageous Republicans were, of course, talking about lies, corruption, obstruction of justice, and danger to our democratic system of government emanating from the Nixon White House. They took our oath of office to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and certainly above a party or short-term policy gain. They took it seriously. And to their courage, we in history owe them a debt of gratitude. So I ask today, amid a swirling of deeply troubling mix of lies, nearly 500 in the first 100 days of this new presidency, obfuscation, withholding of information, attempts to interfere with federal investigations regarding possible collusion with a foreign adversary, thinly veiled threats against those involved in such investigations by our current president. Where are the many Republican patriots who are ready to stand up against these troubling abuses and threats? Mr. President, it's now been more than 7 months since 17 of our intelligence agencies provided overwhelming evidence of a Russian attack on our democracy and an attempt to help elect someone seen as more favorable to their interest, not our interest. The evidence was damning and continues to emerge. And yet, what has this Congress done during the same 7-month period to uphold our oath to, quote, "support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic"? Have congressional Republicans launched an independent investigation into this historic cyber act of war, as we did after 9/11? Unfortunately, no. Have congressional Republicans retaliated against Russia for its actions by imposing sanctions or taking other actions, making sure its leadership knows it will pay a price for such attacks and think twice before doing it again in the United States or at the expense of our allies? No. Have Republicans in Congress passed meaningful cybersecurity legislation to help protect America against future attacks and help any states that request help? No. Have Republicans demanded the appointment of a special prosecutor and insisted that the White House turn over all documents regarding the Trump campaign and ties with Russia, including potentially Russian intelligence? No. Have Republicans demanded that the president explain why he keeps denying Russia's attack on our election in the face of overwhelming evidence? No. In fact, has the majority party done anything to respond to, protect against, or even address these troubling attacks and refusals to cooperation from the White House? Sadly, no. But let me tell you what the majority party has found time to pursue during the 7 months after an attack on our nation, a cyber act of war that will live in cyber infamy. Some of this you simply can't make up. The Republican majority in the House and in the Senate passed legislation making it easier to kill baby bear cubs and their mothers in their dens, making it easier to work with corrupt regimes overseas, making it harder for Americans to save for their retirement, and are trying to strip health care away from millions of Americans in order to pay tax cuts for the wealthiest people in America. Mr. President, this is quite simply an abdication of the majority party's responsibility in Congress to address an attack by a foreign power on our nation and investigate possible collusion by an erratic and sometimes deceptive White House. So, Mr. President, let me close again by asking my Republican colleagues, whom I know care very deeply about the Senate and our nation, when will you speak up about the travesty unfolding? When will you take even a fraction of the action that will most certainly occur if these outrages had occurred under a Democratic president? We need Republicans in Congress to stand up and protect our democratic institutions and to support a special prosecutor and an independent investigation into the Russian election interference now. I am hopeful that Republican senators, some, will have the courage to join us in calling for a special prosecutor. We need someone above politics and above the current controversy whom we can trust to really pursue the facts and the evidence wherever they may lead, to determine what we can do to protect America from another Russian attack in our next election, and to hold Russia accountable for what we have been through. It is time to do this on a bipartisan basis. America is waiting.